Every Sunday for 10 years, I visited my grandmother, brought her flowers, and listened to the same quiet stories about our family. On the last Sunday I ever saw her, she grabbed my hand and said something that changed everything I believed about my father. She whispered that my father wasn't broke by choice. He was broke because our family never once talked honestly and openly about money. That single sentence sent me down a rabbit hole into a financial pattern that destroys more American families than any market crash ever could. According to Cerulli Associates, 124 trillion will change hands between generations in America by the year 2048, the largest transfer in history. Yet, a 20-year study by the Williams Group found that 70% of wealthy families lose that wealth by the very next generation. 90% lose it entirely by the third generation, not because of bad markets, but because nobody in the family ever talked. My grandmother's last words weren't really about my father. They were a warning about a silent financial killer hiding inside most American families. Today, I'm going to show you the real numbers behind that killer and exactly how you can protect your own family from it. So, where did all that generational wealth actually go? And why does silence inside a family cost more than any bad investment? Right now, America is entering what economists call the Great Wealth Transfer, by far the largest movement of money in human history. Cerulli Associates projects 224 trillion will move from older Americans to heirs and charities between now and 2048, according to their 2024 report. Of that total, roughly $105 trillion is expected to flow directly to heirs, while another 18 trillion will go to charitable organizations. Baby boomers and older generations currently hold 61% of all national wealth, up from just 54% 3 years earlier, according to Cerulli's data. That means nearly 100 trillion of this transfer, roughly 81% of the total, will come directly from baby boomers and older Americans. But here's the part most people miss. Over 54 trillion of that money passes to spouses first, not children, according to Cerulli. Nearly $40 trillion of those spousal transfers will go specifically to widowed women, delaying real inheritance for children by years or decades. According to Federal Reserve data, the average inheritance in America is only about 46 to 200, far smaller than most people actually expect it to be. That average is skewed upward by a small number of massive estates, meaning most families receive far less than the headlines suggest. Gen X is projected to inherit nearly $1, $4 trillion per year over the next decade, more than any other single generation right now. Millennials will eventually inherit the most of any generation overall, an estimated $46 trillion the next 25 years, according to Cerulli's projections. Why is this happening now? Rising home values and stock prices between 2020 and 2023 dramatically increased what older Americans leave behind. Real estate values alone surged nearly 39% during that period, while equities grew 27%, according to the same Cerulli wealth transfer analysis. High net worth households, just 2% of all American families, now control 44% of total national wealth, up sharply from 33% back in 2011. That heavy concentration means most of this historic transfer will actually flow through a very small number of extremely wealthy family lines. For everyday families, the real risk isn't missing out on a windfall, it's what happens the moment that money actually reaches their hands. Because receiving money without any real plan is exactly how families end up losing it faster than they ever imagined was possible. My grandmother's family never had trillions, but they had a house, some savings, and secrets nobody bothered explaining before it was too late. And that's the exact pattern researchers keep seeing repeat across millions of American families, rich or not, generation after generation after generation. If you want to understand how to actually protect what your family builds, the free resource linked below breaks this down simply. Let's look at why so much of this money disappears before it ever reaches the people it was originally meant to help. The mechanism behind wealth transfer isn't complicated. Money moves from parents to spouses, then eventually down to children and grandchildren over time. But the real mechanics aren't actually the problem here. Communication is, and that's exactly where most American families quietly fail generation after generation. According to Cerulli, family meetings and regular communication are rated the single most effective wealth transfer strategy by professional advisors at 81%. Yet most ordinary families never once hold anything resembling a real family meeting about money until it's suddenly too late to have one. The honest risk here is simple enough. Money without any communication almost always turns into confusion, resentment, or outright conflict between siblings. That conflict is rarely about the dollar amount, it's about years of silence suddenly breaking open all at once during a crisis. The action point here is equally simple. Start talking openly about money with your family now, long before any inheritance actually becomes real. That single conversation, uncomfortable as it feels, is statistically the biggest factor separating families who keep wealth from families who lose it. Now let's look closely at the second, even more dangerous pattern hiding behind almost every single story, like my grandmother's own story. If protecting your family's future actually matters to you, check out the free video linked below before you finish watching this one. The Williams Group spent 20 full years studying 3,200 wealthy families to understand exactly why fortunes disappear generation after generation after generation. Their finding was staggering. 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth entirely by the second generation, according to that same landmark study. By the third generation, that number climbs all the way to 90%, meaning almost every fortune eventually evaporates within just 2 generations. So where does all that money actually go? The study points to 3 specific, repeatable causes behind almost every single one of these cases. The first cause listed is poor communication. Families that simply never discuss money openly until a sudden crisis forces the conversation to happen. The second cause listed is unprepared heirs, children who inherit money without ever learning how to manage, protect, or grow it responsibly. The third cause listed is weak planning, meaning inadequate estate structures, unclear wills, and no real strategy for taxes or asset protection. Notice something important here. None of these 3 specific causes have anything to do with bad markets, inflation, or poor investment choices. This is a purely human problem, and that means it's also a completely solvable one if families are willing to act early. My grandmother's own silence about my father's finances wasn't unusual at all. It's actually the statistical norm inside most American households, rich or not. Family wealth consultant Jim Grubman notes that fear of spoiling children often makes parents shield them from financial reality almost entirely instead. That protective silence backfires almost every single time, leaving heirs completely unprepared the moment real financial responsibility suddenly lands on their shoulders. Here's the honest risk nobody wants to admit. Shielding your children from money conversations doesn't protect them, it actually endangers them later. The reassuring part is this pattern is entirely preventable, and it costs nothing more than honest, consistent conversation inside your own family. According to Cerulli's own research, families who hold regular financial meetings are dramatically more likely to preserve their wealth across multiple generations successfully. That's not just opinion either. That's the single most effective strategy rated by professional wealth advisors managing actual high net worth family transitions today. The access point here is simple enough. Start with one honest conversation about your family's finances, even if it feels deeply uncomfortable. You don't need trillions of dollars for this pattern to apply. The same silent killer works identically inside modest, everyday families too. My grandmother had a small house, a modest savings account, and a story about my father she chose to keep buried for decades. That silence didn't just hurt my father emotionally, it likely shaped every financial decision he made for the rest of his entire life. Multiply that by millions of American families, and you start to understand why so much modest, hard-earned wealth quietly disappears every generation. This isn't just a rich family problem at all. It's a communication problem, and communication costs nothing except the willingness to finally have it. So ask yourself honestly, does your own family actually talk openly about money, or does everyone just quietly avoid the subject entirely? If the answer is silence, you're not alone, but you now have real data showing exactly how expensive that silence can become. The good news is this pattern isn't inevitable. Families that break the silence early are the ones who actually preserve their wealth. That's genuinely reassuring, because it means the real solution isn't complicated financial engineering, it's simply choosing honesty over comfortable, convenient family silence. Before we move to the next dangerous pattern, remember this isn't about blame, it's about breaking a cycle before it repeats again. My grandmother couldn't undo decades of silence in one Sunday visit, but her final words gave me the chance to finally break it. Now, let's look at the legal safety net most American families completely skip, and exactly why that gap costs families so much more. According to Caring.com's own 2025 wills and estate planning study, only 24% of American adults actually have a legal will in place. That number is down sharply from 33% back in 2022, meaning fewer Americans are protecting their families now than just a few years ago. A separate 2025 Trust and Will report found 55% of Americans have absolutely no estate planning documents whatsoever, no will and no trust. Put simply, more than half of American adults currently have zero legal instructions for what happens to their money after they're gone. Estimates suggest between 50% and 70% of Americans will actually die without ever having created a will, according to multiple industry surveys. So why does this happen? The most common reason given is painfully simple. people say they just haven't gotten around to it. Over 40% of people without a will cited procrastination alone, according to Caring.com's most recent nationwide survey of American adults in 2025. Another 35% of adults said they didn't have a will because they believed they simply didn't have enough assets to justify one. Here's the honest risk behind that thinking. Without a will, state law decides who gets your money, not you or your family. That legal process, called probate, is often slower, more expensive, and far more stressful for grieving families than most people ever expect. Pew Research found in September 2025 that most Americans don't create a will until their 70s, often far later than is truly safe. Meanwhile, only 36% of parents with minor children currently have a will, leaving guardianship decisions entirely up to a court, not the parents. Disparities here are significant too. White Americans are nearly twice as likely to have a will compared to Black and Hispanic Americans. That gap reflects real, structural barriers, including access to affordable legal help, financial literacy, and generational habits around discussing money and mortality. The reassuring part is this problem is entirely fixable, and modern tools have made creating a basic will faster and cheaper than ever. A simple will, a healthcare directive, and a power of attorney can be created in a single afternoon for most ordinary families. Yet, 60% of people without any estate documents report making no real effort whatsoever to actually start the planning process, according to LegalZoom. That inaction isn't laziness, it's often simple avoidance, because thinking about death feels uncomfortable even when the paperwork itself is genuinely simple. My grandmother, like most people her age, eventually created a basic will, but she never once explained the story sitting behind it. A will protects your assets, but it doesn't automatically protect your family from the confusion silence creates around those exact same assets. That's exactly why legal planning and honest family communication have to work together. One protects your money, the other protects your relationships. The action point here is direct. If you don't have a basic will yet, that's the single most urgent step to take first. It costs far less than people assume, and it removes an enormous amount of stress from the people you actually love the most. If you already have a will, the next question is simple. Does your family actually understand what's written inside it, and why? Because a will nobody understands can still trigger exactly the same conflict and confusion as having no will at all in the end. This is exactly where legal planning and family communication finally meet. One protects the paperwork, the other protects the people reading it. My grandmother's last words weren't legal advice, they were an apology for decades of silence that no document could ever fully repair. That's the real lesson hiding inside her entire story. Paperwork matters, but honest conversation is what actually keeps families whole across generations. So here's exactly where all three patterns finally connect: the wealth transfer, the silent communication gap, and the missing legal safety net. Together, these three forces explain almost every story just like mine, and almost every family fortune that quietly disappears within 2 generations. If this pattern sounds familiar in your own family, the free guide linked below walks through exactly where to start this week. Let's go back to that final Sunday with my grandmother, because her words suddenly made painful sense once I understood these numbers. She told me my father grew up believing money was something you never discussed, not with children, not with siblings, not even a spouse. That silence, she said, cost their family opportunities, relationships, and years of unnecessary financial stress that honest conversation could have easily prevented. She wasn't confessing to hidden riches or secret fortunes. She was confessing to something far more common: decades of avoidable, costly silence. Her last words weren't really about my father's past. They were a warning meant to protect whatever future our family still had left. I've since learned my grandmother never had a formal estate plan explained to any of us, just a will nobody had actually read. That gap between paperwork and real understanding is exactly what researchers describe as the true silent killer of generational family wealth today. So what should you actually do with this information, whether your family has millions or just a modest, hard-earned savings account somewhere? First, understand where your family fits inside the great wealth transfer, whether you're likely to receive money or eventually pass it along. Second, recognize that silence, not bad markets, is statistically the single biggest reason families lose wealth across just 1 or 2 generations. Third, understand that paperwork alone isn't real protection. A will only works when the people affected by it actually understand its contents. None of this requires trillions of dollars. It requires the same thing my grandmother waited far too long to finally offer: honesty. Ask your parents directly whether they have a will, a trust, or any estate plan, and whether you're named anywhere inside it. Ask your own children the same honest questions someday, long before a hospital room becomes the only place left to have that talk. The data is clear. Families who communicate early preserve wealth. Families who stay silent statistically lose it within 1 or 2 generations. This isn't about becoming wealthy, it's about protecting whatever your family has already built from the single most preventable cause of loss. Silence feels easier in the moment, but the data from Cerulli, the Williams Group, and Caring come all say the same uncomfortable thing. Silence is expensive, sometimes far more expensive than any market crash, any bad investment, or any single financial decision you'll ever make. My grandmother knew that, eventually, and her last words were her way of finally paying down a debt she'd carried for decades. You don't need a dramatic deathbed confession to fix this in your own family, you just need one honest conversation, starting today. Start small if you need to. Ask one question, share one document, explain one decision you've already quietly made without anyone knowing. Generational wealth isn't just about the money itself. According to every single source we've covered, it's fundamentally about communication, transparency, and preparation. Families that master those 3 things statistically keep their wealth. Families that avoid them statistically lose it within 2 generations, without exception. Now, let's bring everything together into one simple, actionable framework you can actually start using in your own family this very week. Here's a quick recap of everything the real data actually showed us across Cerulli, the Williams Group, and Caring.com's national survey results. First, America is right now entering a historic 124 trillion wealth transfer, the largest in history, according to Cerulli Associates' 2024 research report. Second, 70% of wealthy families lose that wealth by the 2nd generation, and 90% lose it by the 3rd, according to the Williams Group. Third, more than half of American adults currently have no will or estate plan at all, according to multiple 2025 national surveys. Together, these numbers explain exactly why stories like my grandmother's repeat themselves quietly inside millions of ordinary American families every single year. So here is a simple 3-step framework based entirely on what the actual research recommends for protecting your own family's financial future. Step 1. Start the money conversation with your family this year, even if it feels awkward, uncomfortable, or long overdue right now. Ask your parents or grandparents directly whether a plan exists, and ask your own children the same question when the time comes. Step 2. Create or review a basic estate plan, meaning a will, a healthcare directive, and a power of attorney, at minimum. This single afternoon of paperwork is statistically one of the most protective financial decisions any family can ever make for future generations. Step 3. Make sure your family actually understands the plan, not just that it exists, but what it says and why it matters. Nobody understands protects your assets on paper, but still leaves your family exposed to the exact same silent confusion and conflict. Do these 3 things consistently, and you place your family firmly inside the minority who actually preserve wealth across multiple generations successfully. Skip them, and the data suggests your family faces the same statistical odds as the 70% of families who quietly lose everything. This isn't about fear for its own sake. It's about giving you the real numbers so you can actually act on them. My grandmother's last words came far too late to ever change my own father's story, but they came early enough to change mine. That's the real gift hidden inside her final Sunday with me, not an inheritance, but an honest warning worth acting on immediately. If you take one thing away from this video, let it be this: silence is the single most expensive financial mistake families make. Breaking that silence costs nothing but a little courage, and the data shows it's worth far more than almost any investment return. Before you go, please remember clearly that I'm not a financial advisor, and everything shared here is strictly for educational purposes only. Always consult a licensed financial advisor or an estate planning attorney before making any major decisions specific to your own family's situation. If this video helped you see your own family differently, the free resource linked below can help you start that first conversation. Talk to your parents, talk to your children, and don't let silence write your family's financial story the way it once wrote mine. My grandmother waited 10 years of Sunday visits to finally say what mattered most. Don't wait that long inside your own family. Start the conversation today, because the real inheritance worth protecting was never just the money, it was always the honesty behind it.